Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, hazardous weather graphic, quite a lit up area here in the central interior and then out to the west. Starting here in the south, Kenai Peninsula, western Prince William Sound. That's a winter weather advisory out for tonight for especially around Turnagain Pass and other areas there for anywhere from up to 6 more inches of snow falling. Beginning to change to rain, southern Kenai Peninsula around the Homer area, but like Homer Bluff could see more snow. And then high wind warning out for the Turnagain Arm area and upper hillside Anchorage, higher elevations, Chugach Mountains on up into Eagle River there. And that's for 30 to 50 mile an hour sustained winds out of the east through Turnagain Arm with gusts up to 80 miles an hour. And that's for overnight tonight, especially this evening. And seeing gusts already or during the mid-afternoon today from about noon after, 75 miles an hour, McHugh Creek there in Turnagain Arm, Beluga Point at least that as well. So already blowing pretty good there with gusts, let's see, Eagle River. The higher elevations there gusting over 60 miles an hour. Also a high wind warning out for the eastern Alaska range for the same pattern, southeast winds. They're currently gusting 40 to 50 miles an hour around Delta Junction there. Could see gusts above 60 or 70 miles an hour for tonight. Winter weather advisory there, the greater Fairbanks area for snow, and then winter weather advisory for the northern Kuskokwim Valley here. For tonight into tomorrow for the for snow as well. McGrath anywhere from 6 to 12 inches has fallen here from Bethel northeastward into the west central interior areas today, and that's why the heavy snow warnings or the winter storm warnings out for heavy snow in these areas for tonight into tomorrow. Susitna Valley, it's mostly overnight tonight. Could see anywhere from 12 to 25 inches of snow in areas of the Susitna Valley, with probably those heavier amounts back up toward either back to the west toward the mountains or up to the north toward the mountains. And moving along, coastal flood warning for the central Arctic coast here, which pretty good chance of some coastal flooding with that, and then a coastal flood advisory back here to the west. And that could means you could see some minor beach erosion. Then back into the coastal flood warning here for the northwest coast, north side of the Seward Peninsula area, Shishmaref in particular there, again for possible coastal flooding. And then back to the coastal flood advisory for the Bering Strait coast and the south side of the Seward Peninsula there, Nome, for possible beach erosion. And I think that about covers the whole thing there. You can see winter storm warning coming in actually tonight through tomorrow night here for the southern slopes of the central and eastern Brooks Range, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches of snow there with all that moisture coming northward there from the Pacific. On satellite, you can see quite a cloud shield here with that system. Looks like a low pressure here tracking northward toward the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, but load of moisture streaming northward here. Already light snow's getting out toward the eastern Arctic coast there, crossing the Brooks Range. And pretty good snowfall today through the area from especially the Kuskokwim Valley northeastward into the west central interior, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches having fallen, and good snowfall occurring in the Susitna Valley as well. Changing over to rain here with the Kenai Peninsula. Rain and wind, northeast Bristol Bay, Iliamna, rain moderate to heavy at times, winds gusting 50 miles an hour. And the western Alaska Range through the passes, winds gusting 50 to 65 miles an hour this afternoon. And less wind back to the west. In fact, behind the front, starting to clear out there, St. Lawrence Island, Lisa, well, not St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, and up to about Kotzebue there. And then you get back into the snow and blowing snow with Cape Lisburne seeing gusts to about 50 or 60 miles an hour today with this trough, or actually the cold front just to the west there, dropping into the northern Bering Sea. Otherwise, rain and snow showers over the Pribilof, scattered showers to the Aleutians, and less wind. And the Panhandle looking pretty good, not too shabby this afternoon compared to the areas here into the interior. And for tonight, that's going to continue with high pressure over the northwest, or actually British Columbia, influencing the panhandle weather there for dry conditions, mostly clear, light winds, and then strong winds. Again, the high wind warnings were storm warnings, and heavy snow warnings here or for today already going on. Again, the heavy rain there on Kodiak Island, especially the south side, AKwx picking up about 2.5 inches in the last 12 hours. And then a good amount of snow over the southwest interior. Northward there, especially along this warm front, kind of a double warm front in this system here. First surge of warm air right up through here. The second much warmer surge down here crossing Kodiak Island with the heavier precipitation. And some snow for St. Lawrence Island. And for tonight, that system moves eastward here and weakens. So look for rain or snow late tonight here for the southern Alaska, with definitely rain, heavy at times, North Gulf Coast, lighter amounts toward Yakutat, cutting off before it even gets to Elfin Cove there, but look for an increase in clouds over the northern panhandle, and snow all the way out to the eastern Arctic coast. This cold front brings colder air back in, or actually some snow back into the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, and numerous snow showers, and not just kind of a widespread area of snow here over the northern Bering Sea. Central Aleutians nice, next system pushing into the west, and that'll bring gale, possible storm force winds with it during the day tomorrow with rain, another round of rain and a little bit warmer temperatures on those southerly winds. That front here washes out, but a lot of snow showers left over, just mainly along the coast, clearing out over the southwest interior. Another trough with more snow and blowing snow up along the western Arctic coast. Kind of a clear slot in between, and then this frontal boundary hung up. So it's going to be a wet day for tomorrow for Thanksgiving near south central Alaska. The band of snow up to the northeast, and rain heavy at times continues the North Gulf Coast. Doesn't make much headway into the panhandle. Next system pulling northward here really doesn't do much, kind of stalls out, but brings rain back into Kodiak, and that acts to stall this frontal boundary out right across south central Alaska, actually pulling back to the west a little bit there, but that's going to keep it unsettled, damp, and mild here with snow, an area of snow on the north side of that. High pressure controls the north slope and much of the Arctic coast, and then ridging right on down the west side. This front weakens considerably as it pushes eastward, a lot less wind and rain associated with it. In the southeast coast, a couple of really nice days coming up. For lows tonight down that way in the 20s. Otherwise, teens, Copper River Basin under mild southerly flow, lows in the mid-40s for Kodiak Island, and lower 30s here south central Alaska. Teens and single numbers of the north, mostly teens, 20s over the Bering Sea. And for the highs tomorrow, upper 30s here for southern Alaska, and mostly in the 30s, lower to mid to upper for the Panhandle, and teens, Brooks Range, 20s in the Arctic coast, 30s to lower 40s, Pribilof Islands and Aleutians, mid-40s for the highs, about like your lows for Kodiak Island. And then the morning lows 40 there at Kodiak to near zero up over the northern interior. And then the highs for Friday afternoon, single numbers through the Brooks Range all the way out to Ambler and Kotzebue, teens to lower 20s in the Arctic coast and near 40 along the North Gulf Coast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic here for Thursday morning. A lot of moisture coming south to north and then kind of shifting eastward a little bit, but the big push here up to the north. So a lot of IFR all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast, all the way down into the Gulf of Alaska, Kodiak, and then VFR breaking out here behind the front, Bristol Bay, areas of the western interior, back into a more marginal condition there along the coast in the northern Bering Sea, and marginal VFR with some VFR mixed in over the southern Bering Sea and Aleutians. And then for the afternoon, that same pattern here, some VFR now for Adak and Atka and around the Fox Islands, Alaska Peninsula, still VFR, Bristol Bay. Area of IFR here holding over Cook Inlet, Madanuska-Susitna Valley, east of the Alaska Range, and then northeast there across the Upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, but north side of the eastern Alaska Range VFR. Areas of marginal VFR up to the north and northwest with some scattered IFR mixed in. Pretty good here in the Bering Sea. Next system pushing in IFR to shimmy in at 2, and VFR for the Panhandle, except up there in the north, could see some marginal VFR. And then for Friday morning, same thing, marginal VFR, northern Panhandle, Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, and then southern areas or south of there, VFR. IFR holding strong here. Kodiak Island right up across south central Alaska. Marginal VFR there from the Matanuska Valley, and then a little bit of VFR possibly in the Copper River Basin. And then this IFR probably near the Alaska range there, but much more widespread back to the west, and then VFR, north slope with some marginal VFR, western Arctic coast into the Bering Sea here. Pribilofs, possibly VFR, Fox Island, same thing, and a narrower band of IFR here with that slowly moving front pushing into ADAC, and then that takes a jog to the east here by Friday afternoon, but not quite to Nunivak Island, but east of the Pribilofs, or very close to them, so it'll be kind of an IFR day there for St. Paul, St. George, IFR for sure for the Fox Islands, areas of VFR and marginal VFR back to the west, and some same thing here, VFR with marginal VFR, areas of the Seward Peninsula on up to the Arctic coast, and then IFR here from the, I'll say the White Mountains down over toward Tanana, southward across Denali, along the Alaska range here, and south side of the Alaska Peninsula, IFR still for Kodiak Island, and marginal or VFR for the Copper River Basin and the southeast coast, mostly VFR, except up to the north there, a little further to the south now, toward Petersburg, maybe Wrangell. And for Anaktuvik tomorrow, look for IFR. Same thing for Adigan. IFR flying pretty likely, especially on the southern approach of each pass. Well, north side too. Anyway, Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR. IFR for rainy and windy, same forecast, looking to be IFR. And for Isabel, IFR turning toward marginal later in the day. And for Mentasta, it should be VFR, possibly some marginal VFR in the entrance, southern entrance and approach. And for Tanita, marginal VFR, gradually becoming mostly VFR in the latter part of the afternoon. Portage, IFR the entire day. And Chilkoot and White, occasionally marginal, both probably tomorrow and Friday. And for the freezing levels here, warm push coming northward today and tonight, and then shifting eastward tomorrow, by tomorrow morning. So we've got 2,000 feet there along Shelikof Strait up in toward the Matanuska Valley, and then up into the Yukon there, 4,000 feet North Gulf Coast, and then at the surface here, back across the Bering Sea and hugging the coastline of the North Gulf Coast here in the Panhandle. Icing, again, south to north flow coming all the way up from the tropics, carrying moisture there. From about 20 north all the way up here into south central Alaska, that's streaming northward, continuing but shifting a little to the east here. So moderate rime icing possible here in the orange shaded areas, and then also with that next system pushing in to the west. And with that system out west will be 150 knot southwest jet helping nudge it along there, high pressure to the east of that. Deep trough here, southerly flow, about 140 knots from the southwest over the eastern interior, 9,000 feet northwest. Pretty good clip there, 50 to 55 knots, Alaska Peninsula to the Fox Islands, 45 knots, southeast Bering. Lighter over the interior at about 20 to 25, about the same pattern, 3,000 feet. Turbulence, occasional moderate chop, Prince William Sound, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak, and much of the Aleutians.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the Sun radiation magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button, it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button, it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I, as a human being, can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecast, south coast of the Panhandle, not too bad. South to southeast, 10 to 15 knots, seas 4 to 5 feet. Light winds over the inside waters from Dixon Entrance all the way up to Lincoln Canal Glacier Bay, forecasting variable to southeast at 10 knots with 2-foot seas. And the north coast here, south to southeast winds 20 knots, seas 9 to as high as 13 feet. And for Friday, we've got light northwest winds, Lincoln Canal Glacier Bay, central inside waters, light northerlies at about 10, and northeast 10 there for Clarence Strait, with seas remaining about 2 feet or less. And for the coast, southeast winds, 20 knots all along the coastline, and the marine areas here, seas running 12 to 13 feet. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, gale warnings there, southeast winds 35 knots. Same thing for the eastern North Gulf Coast, minimum gales from the southeast. And the western North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, southerlies at 35 knots. So gale warnings there, seas running anywhere from 17 to as high as 20 feet here for the North Gulf Coast. And Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 30 knots, seas 8 feet, and northerly winds at 20 for Cook Inlet. And then for northern Cook Inlet on Friday, northeast winds at 20 knots, 4-foot seas. Small craft advisory south of the Forelands there with 25-knot winds from the northeast. Pick up to about 30 knots for Kamishak Bay. Seas build to 10 feet there. East winds 30 knots for the Barren Islands, as well as the North Gulf Coast with seas running 15 to 17 feet. And east winds 20 knots with 4-foot seas for Prince William Sound. And for Shelikof Strait, northerlies at 35 knots, 8-foot seas. Gale force southeast winds there on the east side of Kodiak and those marine areas with 17-foot seas. And then storm warnings here from Sitkinak to Castle Cape. North winds 50 knots, sustained, seas 20 feet. Castle Cape to Cape Sarachev, north 45 knots, seas near 20 feet. And Bering Sea side of the peninsula there, northwest 30 and north 30 for Bristol Bay. And for Friday, northwest for Bristol Bay at 25 knots, as well as Shelikof Strait, east side of Kodiak, winds will be lighter out of the east at 20 knots. And full gales here from Sitkinak to Castle Cape out of the northwest at 40 knots. Minimum gales down to Cape Sarachev for northwesterlies at 35 knots. West 25 knots here on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, turn northwest at 25 for Bristol Bay. Fox Islands, gales, especially Unalaska Island gale warnings, northwest 35 to 40 knots. Sumac Island, more around 30 knots from the northwest, seas running 13 to 15 feet. Southerlies, Adak and Atka, south 25 knots, or southerly winds 25 knots, seas around 10 to 11 feet. And then gales here, Kiska, or from Amchitka to Kiska, and then storm warnings out toward Chimianatu, southerlies at 50 knots, turn southwest at 35 on Friday. And then westerly gales here for the central Aleutians, and south to southwest winds 30 to 35 knots for the Fox Islands, seas running maybe up to 14 feet. Southwest coast, west-northwest winds 25 knots, northwest 30 knots for the Pribilofs. There's small craft advisories there. Small crafts also for St. Matthew Island, west 25. St. Lawrence Island, north of 20 with 8-foot seas. Southeast 40 knots for St. Lawrence Island the next day with gales down to Nunivak Island. South of Nunivak Island, winds will be northeast at 30, southerlies at 30 knots for the Pribilofs, 45 knots southerlies for St. Matthew Island, the northern Bering Sea. Eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west 20-25 knots tomorrow. Central coast, southwest 25, west 25. Small craft advisories there for the west side, all the way down to Wales. And for Friday, easterly winds 20 knots here for the Chukchi Sea, turning west on the western Arctic coast, and then 25-knot brisk advisory winds, brisk wind advisories, west winds 25 knots there, central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for tonight, this front edges eastward, high wind warning out, especially this evening, upper Anchorage area. A winter storm warning for the Susitna Valley, 6 to 12 inches of snow there. And let's see, coastal flood warning, central Arctic coast, coastal flood advisory the west side, coastal flood advisory or warnings here, Shishmaref in the warning, and the Bering Strait coast in the advisory, with this cold front bringing more snow in. And then for tomorrow, this front really kind of hangs up here, the front up to the north edges eastward toward the border, a break in between, some more action entering the west coast there. Snow showers southeast Bering. Another storm looks like it's ready to hammer Kodiak, but the one out to the west is a little stronger. This one weakens. This one really weakens as it pushes eastward. Keeps it unsettled here over south central Alaska. That's all I have time for tonight. Have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.